Hello and welcome along to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. Before we get into today's episode, a word for our sponsors, NordVPN, who have a new app available for download which allows you reliable and affordable internet access on your trips abroad. Saily is a new eSIM service app brought to you by the creators of NordVPN. With that, you can choose from several affordable eSIM data plans in over 200 destinations. With a Saily eSIM, you'll always have a connection when you need one. You can download Saily in your app store and use our code BLOODRED at checkout to get an exclusive 15% off your first purchase. For more info, please look at the episode description box below for further details, or you can visit saily.com/bloodred. I'm your host for this week, Matt. Addison, Michael Plant is alongside me, just the two of us for this week. But we're going to get into a couple of different topics. It looks, as we record, that Milos Kerkez will be announced sooner rather than later. We're going to have a little bit of a defensive chat as well, more generally. But Michael, let's start with the Hungary left back. It's not exactly a surprise at this point that he's heading to Liverpool. It looks like the medical is underway as we record now on Tuesday afternoon. As I say, by the time people listen to this, it might well be confirmed. But I think it's fair to say that he, his dad, his brother, his whole family really have made it pretty obvious that this is where he's going to be heading. But even though we've known about it for a few weeks, it's still an exciting signing, or at least as exciting as a left-back signing can be, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting signing. I think it's marks a real change of the guard, really, for Liverpool and their tactical approach and how they're going to go about things next season compared to the first season under Arne Slot and even the latter stages of the Jurgen Klopp era. But look, he is a dynamic attacking fullback who loves to run with the ball, creates chances, scores goals. He is absolutely rapid as well. Only 21, plenty of time left to develop. Has obviously played in the Premier League now for the last 2 seasons and has experienced playing in Europe, I think, with AZ Alkmaar as well. So, yeah, I think it's a really good, interesting signing for Liverpool, and I think it's interesting just what we're going to get from the fullbacks this season, because assuming it is Jeremy Frimpong, I know that Conor Bradley's obviously going to have a big role to play next season as well. But if we presume that Frimpong and Kerkez are the 2 starting fullbacks, that is a complete change from Robertson and Alexander-Arnold. And I expect both players will be bombing on next season, bypassing the midfield, bypassing even perhaps the wingers on their flank and getting into the box. And look, I'm just off the back of doing a piece on that now. And the amount of times that both players drove into the box last season with the ball is remarkable compared to Alexander-Arnold and Robertson last season. So yeah, really, really exciting signing, and I'm sure, as you say, we'll get the transfer announced. I presume his dad won't announce it before the club, but wouldn't be a huge surprise given how the last week or so has gone.
Yeah, he's definitely going to inject a lot of energy, I think, isn't he? He's one of those players that gets up and down. He played in every single one of Bournemouth's Premier League fixtures last season as well, which I think is an important thing when you look at that kind of position. You don't necessarily want to have a player that's going to be in and out of the team. He seems to be, physically able to play. He's going to have a lot more games, obviously, and a lot more competition in the Champions League with Liverpool than he had with Bournemouth. But as you say as well, it's interesting as well to see that Liverpool have gone for a couple of flying fullbacks. I know Arne Slot was very impressed with Paris Saint-Germain when he came up against them last season. I have written in the last couple of weeks that I do wonder, whether that might be a bit of a template. Not that Arne Slot is just going to copy what Luis Enrique has done. I'm sure he's got ideas of his own and he's got nuances in that. But just from a fairly basic tactical perspective, it does look a little bit like it might be a very technical midfield. Obviously, Florian Wirtz very technical, along with McAllister and Gravenberch. 2 flying fullbacks. We don't quite know what the number 9 is going to look like yet, but we suspect that there might be a new one coming in. It does feel a bit PSG-ish, the way that Liverpool might look next season.
You must have read my article, even though it's not gone live yet, because I made the exact same point. So, great minds think alike. But yeah, I think there's definitely similarities. And look, Slot referenced that PSG game a lot in the second half of last season and a lot in the latter months of the campaign, because it was the one game, and maybe the one, along with the Newcastle game in the Carabao Cup final, it was the one failure, I suppose, of the season. And when you're an elite team operating at a very high level, you're looking for the most minimal of details to change. And that was certainly one of the games where it went wrong. Certainly that first leg, although they won it in Paris, that was a real game where they were beaten across the pitch, really, in many different positions and in many different areas of the game. And I think that you look at those two fullbacks, and they're definitely an example of, I think, the way the game's going in general. And Kvaratskhelia, Doué, Dembele, they're really dynamic, attacking players in the final third. You add the fullbacks to that as well, and you've got a team that like to dribble with the ball in a very simplistic sense, and that is the way that the football is going, and it's gone over the last couple of years. I think Bournemouth are a really great example of that in the Premier League, and of course Kirk has obviously been signed from Bournemouth as well. So yeah, I think it's a really, really exciting transfer, as to say, for Liverpool, and I think that as well as what they've had in the last season, where they can keep the ball, create chances. You've always got Salah or Gakpo to create something out of nothing. They've now got these players who can ball them on and create chances from deep. So it's going to make them even more round and even more difficult, I think, for opposition sides to contain next season.
Yeah, Arne Slot wanted new weapons, and I think he's definitely got those in his squad. Yeah. Obviously, a couple of other positions to look at as well across the rest of this summer, but there's still plenty of time for Liverpool to do that. Let's move on to centre-back then. Obviously, full-backs we've talked about. It looks like they've got Kerkez over the line, obviously already signed Jeremy Frimpong, but still a little bit of work to do in the middle, not least because of Jarell Quansah's exit, which I think is interesting. He was a player that Jurgen Klopp really liked. It's easy to forget, he started last season in the team ahead of Ibrahima Konate at Ipswich Town, and obviously only lasted 45 minutes before I thought he was pretty harshly hooked, I think, to be honest, in that game. Pretty ruthless from Arne Slot straight away and set the tone. But it looks like he's going to Bayer Leverkusen. I'm slightly surprised that he's moving on in one sense, in that it's only been 1 year where he's not really played too much, and you'd suspect that he might be able to get a few more appearances next season. But I suppose his sort of argument might be that if he goes to Leverkusen, he'll be, I think, their record transfer. I don't think they've spent that much on a player before. You'd imagine he's going to be in the team week in, week out, and that's something I suppose that Liverpool can't even think about guaranteeing him, even with the changes at centre-back. That doesn't feel realistic at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've summed it up pretty well there. I mean, I think it's a kind of a win-win-win, really, for all parties. I mean, I think Liverpool get a nice fee for essentially their fourth-choice centre-back at this stage as well, a player that I'm not sure that Slot was totally convinced of last season. They also reportedly have a buyback option as well in the deal as well. So even if he goes away and progresses and develops as a player, well, he could still come back as well. So I think in that sense, it makes sense. For Quansah, I can understand the want to go and play regular first-team football. He is a player who's been in and around the England squad. He will probably feel he is at the standard now where he should be starting week in, week out. He's going to join a Champions League club as his record signing, be guaranteed minutes. For him and his perspective, I think it makes total sense. He'll also go away, experience a new football and culture, adds, I suppose, an extra string to his bow, really, in terms of his approach to football. He will probably learn little things that perhaps that he might not have in the Premier League. And then from Leverkusen, I just think that they're getting, obviously, a very talented youngster, and one that they see as someone who can operate at an elite level for the next decade, if someone else doesn't come and snap them up. So as I say, I think it's a transfer that makes sense for everyone, albeit, yeah, I mean, when it initially emerged, I was a little bit taken aback, but it's funny, I mentioned last week in the podcast, it's just becoming more and more common now for British players to go abroad, to see the opportunity of openings in Bundesliga, Serie A, and think, yeah, I'm up for that. And I think Quansah, hopefully from his perspective, will thrive in that sort of environment and an atmosphere in Leverkusen.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of changes for Leverkusen. Obviously, Liverpool have bought two of their best players. They've got a different manager, which I think is going to be interesting to see how Erik ten Hag gets on over there, obviously taking over from Xabi Alonso, who did really well. So that's the only kind of reservation I've got from Jarell Quansah's perspective, is you are joining a team that feels like it's been ripped apart a little bit, and you're the next generation. But I suppose that the main thing for him really is that he gets minutes. I think the World Cup point that you made is important. He's impressed and played really well. I know he gave away a penalty for England's under-21s the other night, but apart from that, played very, very well. There is, I think, a decent opportunity for him if he can play every single week, and obviously be in the Champions League as well, be playing at a high level. There is a way that he could end up in England's squad for next summer's World Cup. So, yeah, it's a good move, I think, for him, but it does leave a little bit of a gap for Liverpool. Before we talk about Marc Guehi and a couple of players that possibly could come in, obviously Ibrahima Konate as well is another one with a couple of question marks over his future.
Yeah.
The contract situation is obvious. There's obvious kind of parallels to another player who has been with Real Madrid and ended up there as well. It's interesting that there's been no breakthrough yet. There's obviously been something put down. He spoke to reporters at the end of last season and kind of said, look, there was something on the table. I said, no, it's not really progressed from there. There's not really news at this point. But that's another one that you would look at and think Liverpool would really like to get that one sorted out sooner rather than later, just to stop that chatter, because the last thing I want next season is to be talking about a contract situation, him going through the mixer and coming out with things. We've done more than enough of that over the last few months.
That's a man jaded from writing those sorts of articles for, what was it? I mean, it's got to be a year, I suppose, really, wasn't it? Yeah, look, I mean, fundamentally, you've got a supremely talented player. I would say in the top, certainly 6 or 7 centre-backs in the league. I think you can make an argument to say he's in the top 3 or 4, really, in terms of his ability. So he's a player you want to tie down. He's obviously young, and he's got plenty of years, plenty of miles left on the clock. But we know that if a certain Spanish side come knocking, it proves very difficult for, well, 1, Liverpool to keep players, and 2, for players to turn Liverpool or to turn Real Madrid down. So it's certainly a saga that Liverpool won't want, but at the same time, look, players do leave on free transfers. You know, obviously Trent left this summer. That is far from ideal. That's not what Liverpool want, but it does happen more and more in football now because transfer fees are so expensive, basically, for top elite players, that more and more players are realising, well, actually, my best opportunity to leave is to either get a release clause written into my contract, which Liverpool don't tend to do, or to let my contract run down. So if we do get that situation, I don't think it's any embarrassment or any... I don't think it should be seen as a real kind of stain, I suppose, on Liverpool's record. Albeit at the same time, they will want to get this situation wrapped up. They will want to get it solved sooner rather than later, and hopefully get him tied down to a new deal. But, you know, you and I were talking just before we started recording. I can't see any advantage in selling him this summer, for instance. I think whatever happens, he should be a Liverpool player this season coming. They should, you know, hope he can repeat the same sort of levels that he did last season, and that he can help them, you know, win some more silverware next year. And, you know, whatever comes next summer, Liverpool will hope that there isn't a scenario, but, you know, that will come further down the line. I don't know what your thoughts are on the matter, whether you agree or whether you think there is an option that perhaps they should look at something this summer.
Yeah, I mean, if they weren't doing so many other things across the rest of the pitch, and if they weren't selling Jarell Quansah, then maybe you could make an argument that if a big enough offer came in. But I think there's probably only 2 clubs that he would leave Liverpool and join. One of them is Real Madrid. I suppose Barcelona maybe would be in there as well, but PSG would be the other sort of obvious one to go back to France and play for an elite team. Apart from that, there's not too many options. I don't know how many of those options would be willing to put down a substantial price for Liverpool to think about this summer. I'm sure that's not something that they would want to have to think about, but just hypothetically, if that was the case, maybe that could happen, but I just don't really think that that's particularly likely. It is tricky though, isn't it? Because at the same time as not wanting to lose him for free, I know there's a lot of chatter on social media, which you obviously have to take with a pinch of salt. People saying, well, just sell him now. Well, it's not that simple. Or if you can't sell him, just stick him on the bench for a season or don't play him. Well, again, that's not going to happen. And what sort of message does that send to the rest of the team? Liverpool are not going to pay, let's face it, what is millions in a salary for him to just sit there and not do anything for a season. So I think you've got to have a sensible conversation. Like you say, if Liverpool do end up losing him on a free, it's far from ideal. It's absolutely not priority number one to do that. But if it does happen, hey, we're going to talk about Marc Guehi in a minute. He's going to go on a free as well. Maybe
Exactly.
maybe that might line up.
Well, that actually almost underlines my point straight away. Players leaving for free, it does happen. It is becoming more and more a common part and a common theme of football. So, sometimes it happens, and when Real Madrid come knocking, it's difficult, isn't it? To keep players. Every club have experienced that over the years. So yeah, and I think what's interesting now is Liverpool go into the market for a new centre back. I think they do have to go and sign a new centre back this summer. If it's Quansah, we do think it is going to happen. So that will leave them with 3 elite or senior centre backs. One of whom is Joe Gomez, who, I was just looking at his injury record today. He's never started more than only once in the last 7 seasons has he started more than half of the Premier League games. So he's just not a reliable option for Liverpool to call upon. So they need another centre back. I know they've got Endo, who played there last season. Gravenberch even briefly stepped in once or twice, didn't he? But I think they need a natural centre back option. And what is difficult now is, how do you attract a player who is essentially probably going to come in as third choice centre back? You mentioned the World Cup there. I think that's an issue for Marc Guehi, for instance. So it's a very difficult sign, actually, in some ways to make, I think, this centre-back addition, but one that is important. And throughout the course of the season, Virgil van Dijk and Ibrahima Konate will not start all 38 games of the season. That's before he's talking about the cup competitions. So it's really important that Liverpool have that third-choice option nailed down and have that a choice that they can bring in over the summer months.
Yeah, you mentioned Joe Gomez's injury record there. Ibrahima Konate is another one that prior to last season, I know Virgil van Dijk spoke about how he'd seen Konate do a bit more work in the gym and a bit more around recovery and that kind of thing, which seems to have worked. But up until that point, he was another one that you couldn't particularly trust to string 10 or 12 starts together in a short space of time. Obviously, a key player for his country as well. It's not like he gets the international breaks off or anything like that. So, yeah, you definitely can't go into next season with 3. There's got to be someone that comes in. The question then is who that might be. Now, Marc Guehi is one that has been linked as an option, not the option, but an option. What do you make of him? I think a lot of people possibly might take a little bit of convincing that he is of the level that Liverpool are looking for, but are you a fan of him? Can you see why Liverpool might admire some of the qualities that he has?
Yeah, I like Guehi. I think he's a good player. He's certainly at the level that he should be playing for a top half Premier League side. Is a player who he's fast. He's good playing out the back. Solid defensively. Very rarely makes any mistakes, and I think has stepped up his level in the last couple of years. Obviously, captain Palace, didn't he, to the FA Cup triumph in May. So yeah, look, I think he's a good player. I think that, and I don't think it's going to be the case anyway, if he was being signed as Liverpool's regular starting centre back, I'd maybe have a few concerns, maybe a few issues with that. But I think it's a third choice centre back. He actually would be an upgrade on Quansah, really, wouldn't he? When you think about it simplistically, Quansah is in and around the England squad, currently with the under-21s. Well, Guehi has been a regular in the England squad for the last couple of years. Obviously, played a big role at the Euros last summer, didn't he, as well? So I like him. And look, the advantage is, right, he can come in for a relatively cheap price because he's only got a year left in his contract. And he's English as well, which, Liverpool, they are selling a lot of homegrown players this summer, so it'll help in that regard as well. So I think he's a good player to come in as a third choice, but not as a regular starter. I don't know what your thoughts are on it, Matt.
Yeah, I broadly agree with that. I think he's a decent player. He's Premier League proven. The homegrown thing, I think, will be a factor. Liverpool probably going to have to sign a homegrown player this summer, as you say, given how many are going out of the door. If you're going to make that your third choice centre-back, then that makes sense. But at the same time, you mentioned the World Cup before. I just wonder whether it would be a bit of a risk for Marc Guehi to come to Liverpool this summer ahead of a period really in which he's been He's been regular, certainly for England up until the Euros last summer. I think it would be fair to say that Thomas Tuchel coming in has maybe given a fresh start to a few players, and they might have to think a little bit more in terms of what they do heading into the next international tournament. Obviously, Jordan Henderson isn't necessarily playing at the top level, but is still in there. There is a loyalty element and that kind of thing with these sorts of picks. But I do wonder for Marc Guehi, if he was to come to Liverpool and maybe play half the games, would that be enough for him to get to the World Cup? I suspect there would have to be as close to a guarantee as possible that he would be getting enough minutes to convince him that this was the right time to make that move. Whether that is the case or not with him, I personally would struggle to see that Liverpool could make an absolute guarantee, considering that Ibrahima Konate's just had a season where he's been as consistent as he's ever been. So that's probably the sticking point for me. But then, having said that, I've got no idea really in terms of who else Liverpool could look at. They've looked at young centre-backs for a long time. They've tried to get Levi Colwill at one point. Obviously, Lenny Yoro last summer, Dean Hyson, there was supposedly strong interest from Liverpool. You can understand why that would be. And equally, you can understand why he chose to go to Real Madrid and move back to Spain. So it's clearly a position that they are looking for. I'm not 100% sold on Marc Guehi, but I'd rather Marc Guehi than no one, put it that way, by a long, long distance.
And I think to take up on 2 points just made there, going to the World Cup is one thing. You want to be part of the squad. Guehi wants to be starting. He wants to be starting for England. So he has to be almost starting every single week to guarantee a starting spot in that England squad. And when you consider there are a couple of players who could come back in, I still wonder whether Harry Maguire and John Stones, obviously stalwarts at centre-back for England for a long time, have a role to play next season, particularly Stones, maybe not Maguire, but certainly more Stones. So that's a factor in it. And I think one of the big questions that I have going into this next season, and is kind of pertinent to who will be the new centre-back, is how much is Slot going to rotate? Because last season we didn't see an awful lot of it. And at the end of the season, I remember him referencing in and around that PSG game that perhaps the lack of rotation impacted them in that game in particular. And you do wonder whether he'll maybe learn from that. Listen, he's brought in players this summer that he likes and that he maybe feels that can step into the team. I reference how he didn't like, or I'm not convinced that he was sold on Quansah as an example. He will have players this summer that he likes and does maybe trust a bit more. So that's an interesting dynamic going into next season. But in terms of other players who they could sign, I mean, it is difficult. I mean, one of the players that's been spoken about a lot is Jarell Hato at Ajax, and obviously an advantage of him coming in is that he can play left back as well. He's Dutch. I think there's a few Dutch players at Liverpool at the moment. He's already in the Dutch national squad as well, so he would be one that would certainly be interesting. But then, how much are you going to have to pay? I mean, I suppose he would be worth paying a big sum for if you're going to bring in a 19-year-old top centre back who's going to be there for perhaps the guts of a decade. Then he might be worth it, but it's difficult. I mean, one player that I think is a good option could be someone like Jarell Quansah from Villa. Is he going to want to go to, again, the same questions that surround Guehi? Is he going to want to go from being a first team regular starter every week to back up? I don't know. So it's a difficult one. And that's why maybe you would jump at a player like Guehi in the last year of his contract, because there aren't that many options out there in the market, to be honest.
Yeah, the only other one that I could think of was Zabarnyi. I think has had an excellent season with Bournemouth. He's a lot younger than I thought he was. He's only 22, I think, but looks like he's going to go to PSG. So again, that's one. I mean, how accurate the price tag is, I don't know. But I saw something the other day that said he was sort of 65, 70 million euros, which, okay, very, very good player, really talented. But if Liverpool were to spend that sort of money, would be an absolute nailed-on starter, and it wouldn't be the case that you could spend that kind of money on a third choice. So, yeah, there's definitely conversations to be had around that. Just quickly before we finish as well, obviously we've spoken a lot about the defence and centre-backs. Centre-forward, is that the other obvious one to look at for Liverpool, just positionally this summer? Obviously, we expect there to be developments on Darwin Núñez. There's been a couple of rumours about Diogo Jota as well. I don't know how much there is in those, but is that the two positions, centre-back, centre-forward, that you'd look at from this point?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, certainly the sentiment will change when Quansah goes, because it means that a new centre-back is needed, is a vital addition. I think a new striker is as well. The one thing I keep wondering, and I've been wondering more and more the last week or two, is there a thought from Liverpool that you hold off a year on a striker and you try and get Isak again next summer? That's a big risk. And I mean, I suppose there's similarities with Van Dijk when they held off and got his signing across the line, but that was only waiting a couple of months. It's a big risk to wait a year on Isak, and then potentially even miss out on him again. So that's the only thought. I mean, it would be, if the squad was to, let's assume Kirkus is a Liverpool player, if the squad was to go into the season as it is now, that would be the big area I would look at. I think that's the weakness, is up front, that they don't have a clinical number 9. I don't know what your thoughts are. I don't know whether you think it's something they need to bring in as well.
I think it's more a want than a need from me, as much as anything, because of Florian Wirtz. I think obviously him coming in will add goals and will add creativity. I do just wonder, just having seen what Liverpool have done in the past with these kinds of situations, if the ideal perfect option isn't there for them, they don't tend to do something just not for the sake of it, but they don't tend to do it unless it really suits them and it suits their long-term plan. I go back to what we said a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, really. I don't really think there's a number 9 out there. Obviously, Isak and Julian Alvarez aside, I'm not really sure that there's anybody there that would really turn the dial for Liverpool, compared to, say, another season of Luis Diaz through the middle, or maybe Florian Wirtz as a false 9 at times, or a sort of double 10 with him and Dominic Szoboszlai. I mean, Liverpool scored more goals than anybody else did in the Premier League last season. They weren't short of goal scorers. Obviously, you can't guarantee that, Mohamed Salah, Cody Gakpo, Luis Diaz will be at the same levels again next season for a variety of different reasons. But I don't know, it wouldn't massively worry me if they did wait another year. It's just, as you say, in another year's time, there's not necessarily then an obvious player. Maybe by that point, Hugo Ekitike's had another 20-plus goal season, and you go, right, we've got the data and we've got the knowledge now to go, actually, yeah, he is the one. But for me right now, someone like that would be a little bit of a risk, certainly at the price point that's been reported in Germany that they want. I just don't think there's any chance that, not just Liverpool, I don't think even Chelsea would pay 100 million euros for him, and that is saying something. So that's kind of where I'm at, really. I'm not sold on any of the options really that are seriously realistic at this point. Now, if Isak was to be realistic, then obviously that conversation changes. But for me, I'm not massively worried by it, just because I think Florian Wirtz could be equally as good a false 9 as he is a number 10 personally.
I do think that having Wirtz does slightly shift the conversation in that one again, because obviously we saw Szoboszlai play further forward last season. You could do that again next season with Wirtz. I think actually that could work really nicely. It certainly does lessen the need for a striker, although I do think they need one. And I think that one point that I also would point to is that Mohamed Salah, who has obviously been the main provider of goals, is going to miss, I think it's at least 6 games next season with the African Cup of Nations. It could be more, and you might know off the top of your head. I can't remember the exact numbers, but that would be a concern as well, that you might need that extra attacking option in there for that reason. But the other, on the flip side, is I think whatever striker you're going to get in, unless you kind of go for a cheaper option that I don't really know is in Liverpool's best interest, we are going to be getting up to a summer spending close to 300 million. That is staggering amount of money, yeah, really, when you think about it, especially compared to FSG and the way they've worked for a long time. So maybe there might be a thought, they might look at it and think, well, we spent a lot of money, right? That's us now. I don't know. It depends on exits as well, obviously, as we keep saying. If Núñez goes, if Chiesa goes, and that brings in a bit of money, it maybe changes the conversation again. But yeah, it's certainly, I can see both sides of the argument. I'll put it like that.
Yeah, I mean, if it's Núñez out and Florian Wirtz in, and that's kind of a straight swap, even if Federico Chiesa leaves, I don't think you need a replacement. He didn't play, so you don't need to sign anybody. I think there's enough depth and enough options and enough goal scorers in those positions. But yeah, look, if there's somebody out there on the market, I wouldn't put it past Liverpool to go and sign someone in that position either. I think it's one of those that could go either way, and I wonder whether there might be just a little bit of a collective taking of breath and just seeing, let's see if we can sell a few players and maybe come back to it in a few weeks' time. I think that might be the most likely scenario as sort of pre-season begins and we kind of get into all those conversations as well. But I think we'll leave it there for this week. We've done a lot of chat on transfers there. I'm sure we will do that plenty more times before the deadline. There's still a couple of months to go for Liverpool and the rest of the clubs to make those moves. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of interesting things for us to look out for. But for this week, thank you very much to Michael for joining me, for you guys at home as well for watching and for listening. And we'll be back next week with the next Liverpool.com podcast.